Hi, I'm James McGuire, editor of Datamation, and our topic today is choosing a private cloud solution. To talk about that, we've got three great experts. With us is Joe Weinman, author of Cloudonomics, The Business Value of Cloud Computing. Hey, Joe, how are you?
Great, how are you?
Good, good. And do you have another book coming out? Am I right about that?
I do, yeah. Digital Disciplines should be out kind of this winter sometime.
What is Digital Disciplines about?
Sort of leveraging IT and the pursuit of business strategy. So
Hmm.
it's a classic strategy framework called Value Disciplines: Operational Excellence, Product Leadership, and Customer Intimacy. That is now 20 years old. So I've extended it and explored what it means for the digital era. So it
Neat,
should be fun.
neat. Also with us is Sam Charrington, analyst consultant, a genuine member of the Clouderati, principal at Cloud Pulse Strategies. Hey, Sam, how are you?
Hey James, how are you? I'm doing great.
Good, good. So what sort of clients do you typically consult with in your consulting business?
I work with a pretty wide variety of companies in cloud computing and big data. From startups to big companies whose names you know very well.
Oh, okay. Also with us, Michael Krigsman, advisor, consultant, host of the popular CXO Talk, series of conversations with tech experts. I'm a big fan of CXO Talk. Hello to you, Michael.
Hey James, how are you? It's great to be here.
Good, good. And do you have your next guest booked for CXO Talk? Are you still working on that one?
Oh no, we are booked out for months.
Oh,
This week we have two data scientists. We have an interesting show coming up sometime in August
hmm.
with the CEO of Infor and their chief creative officer together talking about the role of design, good design in enterprise software. So that'll be an interesting show coming up in a few weeks as well.
Okay, sounds good. By the way, I do have sound effects here. I've got applause. If anyone says that, like, if anyone needs any love or validation, just let me know and I'll applaud for you. And a rim shot, Joe. I know you might need that at some point, so just keep that in mind. We have sound
I'll
effects.
probably break your rim shot button.
Okay,
Can we
good.
all get a rim shot button for Joe?
We should. Everyone should have a rim shot button for Joe. So, private cloud, to begin at the beginning, what is a question, if a company is going to start the process of choosing a private cloud solution, what is a question or a couple questions they should ask vendors as they're out there kicking the tires? Or, what's a question they need to ask themselves before they even, go and do that? What's a preliminary question? Sam, what's your take on that? What questions should people be asking?
Yeah, I think they should definitely start asking themselves questions. And one of the most important questions that I think a company needs to ask is what are their intended workloads? Um, there are significant differences in the way you architect the cloud, choose vendors, resource and effort between whether you're targeting cloud-oriented workloads, web applications, and the like, or traditional enterprise-oriented workloads. So I always advise companies to really think about their intended workloads before they start the effort.
Is there a way to put that in a nutshell in terms of, well, if you want this kind, if you're looking for this kind of workload, you want to go in this direction. If you have this kind of workload in that direction, or is it too complex to boil that down?
In some ways it's complex, in other ways it's simple. If you're looking primarily at something that is, similar to Amazon Web Services, but within your own environment, something like an OpenStack or Eucalyptus, that's going to be tailored. That's going to be tailored more for web applications. If you're looking for something that's more appropriate for, enterprise applications, maybe giving you, the next layer of automation and self-service on top of your existing virtualization environment. You should be looking, first at that virtualization vendor and seeing what they've got to offer, as well as folks like VirtuStream and others that have enterprise-capable infrastructure as a service offerings, infrastructure as a service management offerings for the private cloud.
Joe, what's the preliminary question you should ask yourself or ask a vendor as you start this process?
Well, I agree with Sam. I would just maybe add a couple of things to what he said, which is there's certainly the notion of the fit in terms of functionality and security and performance. So if you have existing applications or one that's planned, then the question would be, does that really match the capabilities and the feature set that's in your private cloud selection? To that, though, I would add two things, and I have a few slides on this, but one of the things has to do with the spikiness of the workload. And so I believe that it's important to assure flexibility between private and public, and consequently, also there's an economically optimal selection of which one you would pick that is largely based on the variability and unpredictability of your demand. So that to me would be a critical capability on top of that, right? So kind of, using Sam's criteria, you would narrow down your selection of possibilities to those that are even a fit for your workload or set of workloads. And then on top of that, I would add in the application variability to determine even whether a private cloud strategy makes sense or whether you should be thinking public all the way or should be thinking in terms of hybrid. And then based on that, if hybrid is important, you should be looking at compatibility between your private cloud and the public cloud that you're going to have as a hybrid.
When you talked about spikiness of the workload, I mean, if it is particularly spiky, does that mean you lean towards public or not necessarily?
Well, I have some slides that I can run through.
You've got an audiovisual helper. There's nothing like an audiovisual helper. Can you pull up one of your slides? If it's relevant.
Tell me how to share an app. I guess it's the More button, right? So here,
I think there's actually a button that says Screen Share. It's the second one, a little green arrow.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
Let's see what happens. We might blow up the internet here, but that's the worst we could do.
Okay, let me
I thought you had to print out your slide and hold it up in front of the...
I know, all these ways are the best ways. I can send it via Morse code to everyone.
Things are changing. That's a good sign.
Move this out of the way. Let me see if I can shut this down.
It's actually nice to kind of have a slide. It'd be nice if you could pull it up.
Yeah,
so your clock and your calendar.
Take this. Thought I had it open, but I'll just go through it. It'll take maybe 3 minutes to cover some concepts, and then I'll shut up after that because the rim shots will start coming. So, can you see Datamation webinar?
I sure do.
Okay. So basically, I go into this in depth in Cloudonomics, but there's a set of equations that kind of characterize some of the performance and economic attributes of the cloud. And I'm going to focus on 2 or 3 of these. One is the first one, the penalty cost reduction that comes about through pooled resources that can occur in a private cloud or a public cloud. A second thing is issues with provisioning delays for the value of on-demand. And then the third thing that's relevant is this notion of underutility, when exactly a pure cloud or hybrid is best, which is based on things like the peak-to-average ratio. So the first point I'll make is that if you have one workload and it's got a variable demand, in this case I've got it uniformly distributed, and I add in a few more workloads into this shared pool with dynamically allocated capabilities, and then I add in more and more, what's happening is that I get a smoothing effect. And that smoothing effect is sort of ends up in 2 ways it generates benefits, one of which is the notion that I have less overcapacity, so fewer wasted resources and the opportunity costs associated with that, and also less undercapacity and therefore lower missed revenues. So the important thing is...
Do the red bars represent spikes or
Yeah, so these are samples of a workload. So for example, on the upper left, if I have one workload, on Monday maybe it's 0.7 of a load, on Tuesday it's 0.24, on Wednesday it's 0.01 or whatever that is.
Yeah.
And so if I had 4 workloads, on Monday I would be at 0.5, at Tuesday I would be at 0.30 and so forth. And at 100 workloads I basically would be very close to 0.5. And so what that penalty function looks like is something like this. And the important point is, so if I have this, the x-axis is the number of workloads, and the y-axis is the relative penalty. So at one workload, I'm at 100% of the penalty, but all it takes is one additional workload to get to a 30% reduction. So even though some people make fun of private cloud, and there are issues and opportunities with both private and public, from this penalty function perspective, the point is that I get smoothing effects right away, and in fact, that curve is very steep initially, so I actually have a 50% reduction in the penalty cost of over or under capacity at 4 workloads, and by the time I get up to 20, 40, 50, 100 workloads, I'm actually pretty close to achieving the stat muxing and utilization benefits of an infinitely large provider like some of the majors, right? So there are other reasons that you might go with the majors, including the whole, even though I don't like the term CapEx versus OpEx, certainly the required fixed payment versus the pay-per-use ability. The other issue is provisioning delays, and the point here is that if you have any provisioning delay, then your penalty gets exponentially large if you have exponential growth. So that also argues for either private or public, but certainly accelerated provisioning. And then the last thing I'll cover in this go-round of screen sharing is just the math around hybrids. And the point is that it depends on the relative price in terms of the unit cost between your cost for a CPU cycle, virtual machine, versus that of a public cloud provider, which could be less, the same, or more, and also the spikiness of your workload based on a peak to average ratio. So that's the P and the A. And the English, very simply put, is if cloud services are less than you can do it yourself, then you should use them. If they cost more than you can do it yourself, then actually if the demand is pretty spiky, you still would want to use a pure cloud solution. And in any event that if there's any variation, you would want to, sorry about that, you would want to go for a hybrid, which makes that opportunity to have some flexibility very important.
It seemed like the bottom line there is that last line with the, if it's going to be really variable, the hybrid solution is your best bet.
Yeah, exactly. And so people kind of simplistically look at unit cost differences, and I think it's much better to, rather than that, look at the total cost, which is partly based on the demand variability, and also one little hidden thing about public versus private is performance differences. And it's hard to simplistically characterize those performance differences because, in some ways the public cloud can perform better, right? So you've got kind of nearly infinite bandwidth coming in if you wanted to. On the other hand, to the extent that you can tune your architecture, and this goes back to Sam's opening comments, to your application, then you may well be able to craft just the right configuration of I/O bandwidth and memory and everything else that can achieve a massive performance gain versus a one-size-fits-all, or maybe probably realistically it's more like 30-size-fits-many public cloud solution available today.
Michael, there was a lot of math. I mean, I think I flunked college calculus. I'm not sure. But is there a... Interesting answer, Joe. Michael, is there a couple of questions that you ask or that you recommend companies ask as they start the private cloud solution process, or things they need to ask of themselves?
I have to say, I first met Joe a number of years ago when he was working still at HP, and I saw these. Joe showed me. I attended a presentation, and I saw these equations
Right.
And I dutifully, this was before he released the book, and I dutifully went back and studied and read this all, and I came away thinking, this guy is about as smart as anybody I ever met. And I still feel that way. But, you know, I spent a lot of time...
But, there's the but. But,
no, there's no but.
Yeah.
There's no but. There is a but.
We're listening.
I spent a lot of time with CIOs, and I spent time with IT departments, and I almost always take the point of view asking, what do the users want? How can we put together a set of technologies and services that the users will find attractive and that the users will adopt, and that the users will not feel that they have to bypass what IT is doing in order to get their work done in a responsive way and to have the technologies and the products that they need. And so, of course, what Sam said regarding the technology aspects is true, of course. And likewise, what Joe said regarding the economics makes complete sense. But I turn it around and I ask them, what is the impact on the user and addressing user needs? Or are we boiling this down strictly to a technology and an economic argument, which is what IT has been doing pretty much since the beginning of time?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you're talking about the user needs.
Michael's comments real quick.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so I agree completely with that. I think cultural skills, organizational motivation, and behavioral economic issues are absolutely essential. So, just to give a few examples, I think for example, the fact that a lot of the major cloud providers have major development communities that are associated with them, that would impact your selection of where to go simply based on the time and cost of retraining your IT staff. Security concerns and perceptions of security concerns are another. Perception of reliability and long-term viability of the provider is key, right? And they may be factual or not, but like it or not, they're an important part of decision-making criteria. So that's so I completely agree that there's a broad variety of dimensions in the real world that you need to look at, which is quantitative and qualitative, to really decide what you're going to do and why. And right now, the other thing that we shouldn't discount is the fact that there's a risk to not doing something in the public cloud, which is you would look like a laggard. It's like saying, no, we're not going to use mobile. So that's a completely separate issue, is the perception of kind of your standing as a CIO with the executive team, because let's face it, the CEO is reading all about the cloud while they're pulling the magazine out of the seat back in front of them or reading the latest Datamation or whatever, and so all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a minute, how come we're not doing this?
I think that's more than just perception. There's a tangible risk of just being caught flat-footed and not being at step with where your competitors are when the market matures.
Well, Sam, boil it down for us. I mean, it's what tends to be the deciding factor, whether it's math, whether it's user needs, when companies choose a private cloud solution. In your experience, what tends to be the one thing that really pushes them over the edge? Is it cost? Is it what the users need? Hopefully. I think what is the deciding factor?
I think the thing is that there's no one thing. I think it depends a lot on the business goals, the goals of the team that's pushing the project forward, and the business goals can vary pretty dramatically. Many companies will pursue cloud, public or private, on an economic basis. Particularly on the private cloud side, we often see companies going that route to reap incremental enhancements on their existing investments in virtualization, automate a little bit more, etc. There are other companies that take perhaps a more visionary tack and really see cloud as an opportunity to transform not just IT, but to transform the business. And the approach that one takes, the economic models that back those approaches, the technology choices that undergird those approaches are dramatically different depending on what the business needs and what the business is trying to do.
Yeah, so if I can just build on that, I would say
just a real quick one, Joe. Is there a way to like create this hypothetical company? Say it's a a Midwestern hospital chain with seven different hospitals, kind of a mid-level business. Is there a way to answer the question for a specific type of business, or is it still very situational?
It's situational in that you've got different risk tolerances, you've got different stances towards innovation. There are a lot of factors that go on it. What do you think, Joe?
No, I completely agree with you, Sam, and I was just going to boil it down to it's either strategic or economic, right? And so I think a good example of strategic is Netflix, that's basically said, look, we don't want to waste our time with data centers. Like, we're not going to, nickel and dime which way is the better way. We want to get out of that business so that we can focus on what's really important to us around, content and, customer experience and things like that. At the other extreme, you've got the, classic pure financial. And James, to your question, I don't think it's vertically dependent. Sam's got it, hit the nail right on the head, which is it's based on things like, culture and tolerance to risk. So most large companies that I know will always want a business case for why to do A or B, right? And they've got very disciplined processes against project approvals and, board approval and things like that. And they can't just say, we think this is good, or, we just don't want to be involved in worrying about our own data centers. We're not in that business. And so for those, then they can kind of have their cake and eat it too, which is they will address that risk of not doing anything in the cloud by saying, oh yeah, we're running a bunch of trials and we've got some prototypes and we're letting some people experiment with this stuff. Mm-hmm. When it actually comes time to committing corporate resources to a plan of action, which could be career ending, then they're going to want a very solid financial assessment and a business case, with a sensitivity analysis and with a risk assessment and risk mitigation plan, because that's the way they do everything.
Well, there's always
yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
There's always a mixture, as Sam said. There's always a mixture of the cultural and the economic, because, for example, in some cases, cloud is seen by the CIO or by IT as a kind of stepping stone. Private cloud is seen as a stepping stone to the public cloud. And so, for example, if the CIO is very concerned about the security of data, and we need to talk about that point because that's an interesting question, who is more secure, public or private cloud? But be that as it may, it feels good to be able to say the data is within our virtual four walls, right? The data is on our premise, even though literally it's not on our premise. It may actually be stored inside our partner's premise. It feels good to claim that ERP data or transactional data is inside our private cloud. And yet at the same time, the CIO, as Joe said, needs to be thinking about public cloud, because that's what the CEO is thinking about. That's what all the users are asking for. So private cloud is a step in that direction, but those viewpoints will, again, be tempered by the economic arguments. And you can do the kind of analysis that Joe just took us through, where there are break-even points based on different types of scenarios and workloads and so forth, where a private cloud is more or less economical than corresponding public cloud. So you have both sides of it, the cultural and the economic.
What was your point about data security? If you're talking about, was there a point they're making about the safety of data,
mm-hmm.
or is that?
Yeah, the security. Who's more secure, your private cloud or a large public cloud provider?
that really does this all the time and is totally protected as much as you can be, rather than just one individual data center. Sam, what were you
Yeah,
going to
but I
say?
mean, I think what Michael's saying, pointing out, is a lot of people are like, "Oh, the public cloud isn't secure," but when you actually dig in, the question you have to ask is, are the two folks that you hired, just out of trade school, who are
Bingo.
your security staff, as good as, the, 500 people that each of the major cloud providers has with, PhDs in obscure,
Right.
security topics,
Encryption.
and
Yeah.
24/7 global security operations staff, and contacts in the research community to deal with zero-day vulnerabilities, et cetera. And that's not including other things like as far as mitigating distributed denial of service attacks. The point that an enterprise data center has nowhere near the bandwidth, and therefore things like network firewalls or network-based anti-DDoS capabilities that, again, a large provider would have. So, I think there's trade-offs both ways, right? Like, you can look at, it's varies based on vulnerability. So if you say, vulnerability by vulnerability, sometimes the public cloud provider is going to win, like the ability to maintain a leading edge security staff and anti-DDoS capability. And other times, for example, risk that your data will be subpoenaed under some sort of completely sealed letter that the provider isn't even allowed to say anything about, then that's obviously a bigger risk than a subpoena that would be required to grab data that's physically on your facility. So there's trade-offs both ways, and it's simplistic to just say one is better than the other.
Can I just make a point about cloud in general? What does cloud mean? Cloud actually means pooling of resources, right? That's the foundation of cloud, public cloud or private cloud. And when it comes to skills such as, and expertise such as security, the larger pool is going to win. And I think that's an
Pool of
important
experts, you
way to
mean?
think about it.
The larger pool of experts, you're saying?
Exactly,
Yeah,
precisely.
right.
So Michael made an interesting point earlier that I wanted to tag on to. You mentioned the notion of private cloud being a stepping stone to public cloud, and we've talked about that. That was a very popular notion a few years ago. What I've seen more recently is that folks have realized that private cloud is actually pretty hard, and public cloud is a stepping stone. Public cloud in many ways has become a stepping stone to private cloud. So you're seeing enterprises take advantage of the ease of use and ease of access of public cloud resources for tests, development, and other purposes, but the target for deployment and their long-term intention is to establish a private cloud that gives them many of those economic and agility advantages, but without the risks, perceived or not, of the public cloud.
Hey, James, can
Yes.
I take
Go ahead.
60 seconds and show 2 more slides?
You've got audio-visual help?
All right, let's see.
Let's see
Are you
it.
still live on the slides?
I think you've got to click screen share again.
Okay, I do. All right, let's see.
Even for bringing the audio-visual help, I'm going to give you some applause.
All right.
That needs to be praised, Joe.
Okay. So briefly, I'll just to build on what Sam just said, and also get into, well, what do we mean by hybrids? I mean, this is kind of generally what people mean somehow with hybrids, right? There's some users, there's an enterprise data center or global network of them, and there's a cloud provider or maybe several and their individual locations. But I've identified 8 major types of hybrids, and that's before we get into combinations of these. One of which is the notion that I can kind of run simultaneously in both enterprise and cloud, and because it's essentially stateless for whatever service I'm offering, I don't need to worry about any data sharing between them. Then there's the BCDR scenario where the users actually connect to the enterprise data center, but there's synchronous mirroring, let's say, and or object replicas that are stored of databases or what have you, and recovery ultimately in the cloud. Then there's the cloud as the front end, where I'm doing my content delivery or delivering applications out of the cloud, but my transactions ultimately are going into some sort of database of record in my own data center. And then there's sort of the ideal that we'd like to see, and which will happen sooner or later, around full bidirectional data integration. So whichever way users come in, I still have kind of a replica of whatever transactions have occurred in both locations. And then what triggered it is Sam's comment, which is there's also thinking about hybrids essentially over time, which is a different kind of way, maybe not a traditional use of hybrid, but running, dev test, let's say, on my own laptop and/or data center, and then pushing it into the cloud for actual production. Then there's running dev test in the cloud, including maybe load testing, but then running production in my data center. And then there are these two migrations. So there's the one on the left, bottom left, which Michael mentioned, which is kind of starting in the private cloud and then migrating over time to the public. And that looks maybe more like a Netflix strategy. And then there's the migration from the cloud, which is, once I've proven everything, and maybe there's a business case to be made, like the classic one is Zynga with zCloud a few years ago, and more recently Evernote found 4-to-1 savings by moving out of the public cloud into their own data center. So that's kind of the case that Sam was talking about. Okay, that's my 90 seconds. So let me go back to
all right
to you
and
guys.
then let's not forget there are quite a number of software vendors these days who will allow you to move your instance of software from public to private as well, which make this transition that Joe was just describing easier.
Yeah, and that was kind of my part of my opening comment, is kind of around the notion of when you're selecting a private cloud, one of the things that you'd want to think about is exactly that. Like, it may be the best private cloud ever, but if you ever think that you want to get out of Dodge and go public, then you don't want to have to say, oops, now we've got to completely rethink our stack and rewrite all our applications.
Moral of the story is that there is a dizzying array of cloud deployments, cloud configurations.
Right.
And I think it's like one of those almost unwritten aspects of the cloud is that there's all those rogue deployments where people just got frustrated with IT and they use their division's credit card and they have their own little cloud deployment. There could be several of them in the company that the company might not even be aware of the other deployments going on. At any rate, cloud confusions and mistakes. I think it'd be interesting to share some instances or possibilities of what sort of confusions or mistakes the companies make as they deal with private cloud. Sam, have you heard of any, or where do you come across out there?
Yeah, when I think of confusions, I was thinking of the way Joe had his screen set up there. It was kind of like looking into parallel mirrors for a second. So I suggested this a bit earlier, but I think one of the biggest mistakes that companies make is just not thinking big enough. Cloud can be, a force for transformation, and it's very easy to get sucked into an incremental economic argument and make limiting choices, limiting in terms of architecture, personnel, resources, scope, all kinds of things, and I see far too much of that, and there's a true risk that a company goes down this path thinking that they're going cloud and they're going to get all the benefits, but they're not taking an aggressive enough approach to really keep pace with the opportunity and what the market will and can do with this technology.
Like they want to put one foot in the water first to see if the whole thing works?
I think there are companies that put one foot in the water as an element of diligence and validating a broader vision, but then there are companies that for whatever reason don't see much further than the few inches under the water line, and can't haven't really created a broader vision for how cloud and even more broadly than cloud, how the quote unquote third platform, mobile, social, cloud, all these technologies, how these can truly impact the not even just the business, right, but their industry. And I think that's a true opportunity for companies with this technology, and when it's not taken advantage of, it's an unfortunate mistake in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Joe, big mistakes, fumbles, confusions in private cloud deployments?
Well, it's tough coming right after Sam. But in fact, that's the topic of the new book is, as I mentioned, kind of looking at business strategies to leverage the cloud, mobile, social, big data analytics, and the Internet of Things. And that's kind of a broad, range of capabilities. And so, regardless of all the slides that I put up around economic optima and cost optimization, the point is that you really need to think of it, as Sam says, in this much broader picture, which is how is this strategic? What am I trying to do with the business, and how do I deliver competitive advantage? And just to give you one example that I think really hits home and I've been using a lot, it's Nike and the Nike Hyperdunk Plus sneaker. You could say if you were, you're an old line, whatever they are, 40, 50-year-old, maybe more sneaker or athletic shoe manufacturer, that what's important is brighter packaging, celebrity endorsements, things like that. And what they realized is that they could compete effectively, and I don't have time to go into all of the different things, but with Hyperdunk Plus, the point is that there's multiple pressure sensors embedded in the sole. Those connect up through your mobile device to the cloud. That then is used for tracking and also being able to do things like link the exact sequence of moves you did to G-force acceleration, how high you jumped, etc. Even then being able to tag a video with that. So if you're taking a video of someone playing basketball, then you can tie their exact acceleration and jump height to the video because it's all time-stamped. So this now really transforms strategy from we've got to reduce our manufacturing costs by using cheaper rubber or offshore manufacturing and customer value proposition to look, you'll be cool just like this basketball star, into a whole new thing, which is we will make you a better athlete. And that's the cornerstone of our strategy, is to say we will help you transform and be the best that you can possibly be. And the way that they're doing that is by creating this digitally enabled strategy, of which the cloud is essential to that, because everything from the social networking, here are the races that I ran, the pace that I ran at, here's the routes that I run, this was my personal best, this was, I'm not using up enough Nike fuel or earning enough Nike fuel this week or today. So, it's really about that whole higher dimension of competition that ultimately is enabled by the cloud. And so, to Sam's point, and also to Michael's point earlier, just not thinking about it too much just in terms of I can save a nickel here or a dime there versus I can transform my business and gain strategic competitive advantage. That's probably the biggest mistake, is just treating it as a technology or operations model merely.
Michael, big mistakes you see out there, fumbles, things people aren't realizing about private cloud?
Yeah, I have to agree. I think that the most important thing is to have some type of strategy or perspective. Yes, you can do the cost analysis, and of course the cost analysis, like Joe and Sam said, is extremely important. But at the end of the day, if your goal with IT is to shave a percentage, right, percentage or 2 percentage points off of the cost, the aggregate cost of IT to the company, and that is your primary strategy as a CIO, quite frankly, you're screwed.
Mm-hmm. Because it might not be a cost savings.
Cost savings, hey, I'm not minimizing the cost or the value and the importance of cost savings at all. However, as Sam said, the real opportunity here is to think about how we can actually move the needle and change the game in some way for our users. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I was in a meeting the other day with a CIO and the senior IT leadership staff, and they're trying to figure out what to do with certain types of applications and so forth. And it was a discussion of features, functions, and business requirements, which is the kind of stuff of what IT deals with all the time. And the CIO, who's very innovative, she came across and she said, well, wait a second, what users want from us is an Amazon-like experience. They want a single portal, and depending on your role or your position or what have you, the resources that are made available then change. And it's that type of thinking, which is a broader thinking. How can we supply a different kind of IT experience, which really should be at the heart of how you're thinking about private cloud as well as other large IT initiatives? So it's not just a matter of shaving a point of cost out of IT. It's doing that, but at the same time, again, to use Sam's words, at the same time, thinking big. And how can we actually use IT as a strategic enabler inside the company to actually benefit the users and forge a greater bond with the users? Mm-hmm.
To put some numbers on Michael's point, just briefly, IT is on average 4% of revenues. And so if you say that you have 20% of your applications that you've moved over to the cloud, that's only going to impact 0.8% of revenues. And if there's a 30% savings, then which some people have found moving to the cloud, that's like a traditional planning number. You're talking about 0.2% maybe, right, of the overall revenue. That's not a board level, CEO level issue. And in fact, there's some great data from Sunil Mithas at the University of Maryland that he looked at 83 firms and found actually that there was a big payoff to IT. It literally was almost doubling your money, 1.91 to 1 improvement, and it was almost all on the revenue side. In other words, it's only meaningful on the revenue side, back to the way that this can enable strategic initiatives, either accelerated time to market, better user experience, an entirely new value proposition within the product, and so forth.
Yeah, it's a lot of good stuff. I want to, wrap things up with one last question, sort of, looking into the crystal ball. If you look ahead, say 3 or 5 years from now, where is private cloud, going to be? Are we still going to be talking about private versus public, or is that term going to be falling away? Are all clouds going to be hybrid clouds? So Sam, when you look into your crystal ball, what do you see for private cloud in the future?
Yeah, I think the future is hybrid. It's interesting, as Joe shared his slides, kind of mapping out and segmenting the different private cloud use cases, or the different, hybrid cloud use cases. The one that seems most elusive is the very first one, where you've got some app, it's bursty, and you want it to, mostly live on your private cloud and kind of build for the average, so to speak, and then spike into the clouds. And the examples of folks doing that, at scale and achieving the, the efficiencies of the vision, I think are much fewer and further between than some of the other examples. Doing failover to another data center. In some ways, those are hybrid cloud washing. Can we call? It's a lot of stuff that we.
Why are you calling it hybrid? Work with me on that one.
No, I was saying it's hybrid washing. If you will.
Yeah, okay, right.
Kind of a lot of stuff that we've done before, and kind of calling it, putting it under the umbrella of hybrid cloud. To be fair, a totally valid thing to do, but that core use case, I think, still. Remains to, there's still a lot that needs to happen in order for that to become more prevalent. And I think, over the next, 3 to 5 years, we'll see more of the pieces put into place, both organizationally as well as from a technology perspective, to support that. And I do believe that that's the future.
Joe, what do you see a few years out for private cloud, or are all clouds going to be hybrid?
I don't really see, that big a qualitative difference. I think you're going to see more and more workloads move into the public cloud, but I don't believe in that the end state scenario is all public. I think that in every other industry you look at, it's a mix of private and public. So people own their cars, yet they also rent them. They own homes, yet they also stay in hotels. They get electricity from the grid, and yet they've got increasingly solar cells on their roof. So as the economics have shifted for private versus public, you're seeing a greater adoption of private electricity clouds. And so, back to the point that economics plays a large role. While the electric grid was much cheaper than do it yourself, then that was a smart thing to do. And if you can generate your own electricity, on a sunny day and store it, then why pay somebody else and incur transmission and distribution losses? Back to Sam's point, the cloud bursting scenario, is a little bit elusive in terms of simplicity, and a big part of that is the data gravity issue. And so I wrote a post probably 5 years ago called 4.5 Ways to Deal with Data in the Cloud that was trying to address that, but it's still very real because, unless it's stateless, then you don't have that many options. You've got remote data access, which can be costly. You've got trying to replicate the data during a cloud burst, which just takes too much time for anything that's non-trivial. And then you have some bidirectional mirroring technology that exists, but it's really more for the metro area. So you've got these sort of imperfect technologies, but I think that there are solutions subject to the ultimate difficulty of, if you have a really large database, then you've got inertia, as Dave McCrory has pointed out in that data gravity stuff. So that's the issue with the pure, clean, elastic hybrid. But on the other hand, you do find some things where that's really easy. And a good example is Sony Online Entertainment, which does have a cloud bursting strategy. It's maybe not for a core application the way you would think, but they do their own content delivery for things like if you're interested in an artist, that goes into an enterprise data center. But what they found is they had a pure private cloud strategy, and when Michael Jackson died, all of a sudden their data center was getting all these hits for people that were just wanting to watch Michael Jackson videos and things like that, and their core e-commerce system went down due to the load. So their new strategy is it's a cloud burst for the catalog portion, and a private cloud or even legacy architecture, you might say, for the e-commerce portion, so that they serve everything themselves because they can do it cost effectively. But then when they do get these unpredictable demand spikes, then they leverage a public cloud provider and let the customers go directly to the cloud provider and get that content, because first of all, the data is not changing in real time. It's songs and pictures and whatever, and it's not enormous, right? It's not a multi-exabyte database. It's probably large, but it's nothing that can't be pinned in some public cloud provider at relatively low cost. And then as a spike comes up, there's ways to pull it out of cold storage and make it available with lower access time. So those kinds of things, I think, really represent what we normally see all over the place, which I don't mean to use the term hodgepodge in a derogatory fashion. It's a, let's say, complicated hybrid of technologies, best practices. It's application or application module dependent, and it's using the best of what's possible as it's appropriate.
I think the word is heterogeneous, Joe.
Heterogeneous.
A wildly heterogeneous environment. Michael, we look to you for the future to tell us what's going to be happening 5 years from now in private cloud and/or cloud computing. What do you say?
So I think over time, we have to remember that cloud computing really is in its infancy. And as time goes by, we become much more comfortable in general with cloud computing. There's more and more growth in cloud computing. And what we'll see is the cost of public cloud resources, the economics shifting dramatically. I mean, just for example, recently, if you look at file sharing, the cost of file sharing and file storage in the cloud with companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Box following suit, after Google made their price cut announcements. So the economics are shifting. And as I said earlier, cloud is the pooling of resources, and so as those pools become larger, they become more efficient. They become more efficient technologically, they become more efficient economically, and from an innovation standpoint, that's where the innovation is going to be happening. At the same time, there are valid reasons for companies, in some cases, to keep their data in-house, and that data gravity problem that Joe and Sam mentioned is real, but also over time, the ability to integrate and to have data flow seamlessly back and forth between different clouds, among different clouds, is also going to increase, because cloud is not standing still. So I think the future becomes more and more cloud-ridden, cloudy. I use that term.
Cloudy, okay, great.
Cloudy with a chance of hybrid.
There you go.
What's that? Yeah. So there you go.
It's
Cloudy with a chance of
increasingly
hybrid,
clear
I think
that it's increasingly cloudy.
Increasingly
Indeed.
cloudy in a hybrid kind of way.
I greatly appreciate the expertise of the three of you. I'll send you a link. I'm going to edit this just a tiny bit, just top and tail, and we can all promote it and tweet it. But the two of you really shed a lot of light on this, on the topic. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Oh, actually, we need applause.
Too.
There we go. All right, I think we earned that. All right.